Lent is a season of slowing down, of looking inward, and remembering who we are. A spiritual journey through the wilderness where comfort fades and truth speaks. It's 40 days of intentional reflection, 40 days of authentic repentance, 40 days of remembering that from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. It's not about earning God's love. It's about experiencing that love. It's about turning down the noise, turning away from sin, and turning toward the Savior. So for 40 days, we remember his suffering, we reflect on his sacrifice, and we prepare our hearts for the hope of resurrection.
Well, welcome to all who are joining us today. We are recording this talk for the week of Ash Wednesday, 2026. Hard to believe we're this far into the year already. So glad that you're joining us for today's talk. And today I want to start with a great big thank you. Thank you to those of you who made a financial commitment to the church at the end of last year, completing a giving commitment card to give regularly to the church from January through June of 2026. We're through the first month of the year, and I'm so pleased to report that in January, we not only met our giving budget, but we actually exceeded it by a few $1,000s. And that is really an encouraging thing. As I shared at the end of last year, we've gone through a pretty lean stretch where a lot of months we didn't meet our giving budget. And so encouraging to start this year on a positive note, and that's because of your commitment and your faithfulness to give, to support the work McLean Church is doing in this region. Let me encourage you to continue your faithfulness in that area. February, March, they tend to be pretty lean months historically for us in terms of giving. Keep that giving consistent. It really makes a difference in our ability to do the things that we do in this region. Well, as we mentioned at the start, we're recording this talk for the week of Ash Wednesday of 2026. Ash Wednesday begins the season of the church year known as Lent. And a few weeks ago, as we were talking about the beginning of the Lenten season, it occurred to me that we've never really done a talk or a presentation on the church year or the church calendar. We hear these different seasons talked about in the church year, like Advent or Lent, but we've never taken time to really explain how the church calendar works and why the church calendar is important. What difference does it make to us practically thinking about these distinct seasons throughout the year? So today, again, want to do something a bit different. This isn't a sermon in the truest sense of the word. This is more of a lecture, a classroom talk. We're going to talk about calendars in general, starting with how we got the calendar that we presently use. We're going to make some comments about our presently used calendar. And then we're going to talk about the church calendar, how it developed, why it developed, and specifically about the season of Lent and what that season offers to us in terms of the development of our own lives. So I need to start with a disclaimer in saying, in talking about calendars, we're going to talk a fair amount about science and math, two things that I am probably one of the most unqualified people to talk about. So I'm going to do my best to present this accurately. Please note, if I present anything in this talk that is not scientifically or mathematically correct, feel free to email me so I can issue a correction. But let's begin by thinking about time in general. And let's imagine that we lived a long time ago, back in the ancient world. Let's say, just for the sake of discussion, let's say we lived around the year 2000 BCE. This would be back around the time of like Moses in biblical history, or I'm sorry, back more around the time of Abraham in biblical history, a long time ago. If we lived in the ancient world, how would you go about keeping track of time? How would you keep track of time? Well, if you think about that question long enough, you start to realize that it would be fairly easy to keep track of a day or days. The sun rises every morning. It sets every evening. There's a period of darkness, and then it begins all over again. That sun rising, sun setting would be a natural way and a fairly obvious way of us keeping track of a day. And if we were really astute, we might notice that over the course of days, particularly at nighttime, there's an obvious change that occurs in the sky, and that is our ability to see this big body in the sky that we presently call the moon. Sometimes it's really small. We see only a sliver of it. But as the days pass, we see more and more of it. And eventually we get to this point where we see seemingly all of it. And then it goes back to just a sliver again. And this seems to happen about every 30 cycles of the sun rising and sun setting. We'd probably be able to figure out what we've come to call a month. And you know, if we observe these cycles over a long enough period of time, we'd also begin to note that over the cycles of days and cycles of months, there's also a cycle of seasons. If in the year 2000 BCE, we lived in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, I don't know what the climate was like back then, but suppose it is what it is now, we notice that every so many cycles of this moon, so many months, we get snow. And then after so many cycles of snow during these moon periods of approximately 30 days, the weather starts to turn warm again. We'd start to notice rhythms to the seasons, which we now know are really driven by the sun and the relation of the sun to the earth. We'd be at the beginning of trying to identify what we've now come to call a year. By the year 46 BCE, these cycles get formalized into the precursor of what is our present day calendar. They get formalized by a man named Julius Caesar. ruler of the Roman Empire, who creates what has come to be known to us as the Julian calendar. And Julius Caesar and those who undoubtedly helped him create this calendar were pretty astute people, because they realized in this cycle of seasons that we've come to call a year, there are actually 365 days, cycles of the sun rising and sun setting. And in fact, they realized, are you ready for this? That there are actually about 365.25 days in those cycle of seasons in what we would call a year. And to account for this extra quarter of a day every year, Julius Caesar, and again, those who were helping him, introduced the idea of a leap year, that every 4 years there'd be an extra day to account for this extra quarter of the day in a year. Okay, interesting information, right? Now, this Julian calendar functions, it actually goes into effect in Rome January 1st of the year 45 BCE. And it functions as the prevailing calendar in the West. Are you ready for this? Until 1582 of the Common Era. So for 1600 years, the Julian calendar, with 365 days in a year and a leap year every 4 years, becomes the calendar that the West uses. In 1582, there's a pope, Gregory the 13th, who's going to change this a bit. And here's why he changes it. He changes it to produce a more accurate way of determining the date of Easter. Now stay with me here for a minute. Easter, arguably one of the two most central holidays or holy days of the Christian year. Easter, since the early centuries of the church, was set as the first Sunday following the first full moon following the spring equinox. You got that? First Sunday following the first full moon following the spring equinox. Spring equinox this year, I think, is March 20th. We wait till the first full moon after that spring equinox. Then Easter is the following Sunday. That's how the date of Easter has been set from the earliest of times of the Christian church. Julius Caesar's calendar was close to right, but it was inaccurate in one way. Julius Caesar thought a year was 365 and a quarter days. He was almost right, but he was 11 minutes short. The year is actually more like 365.24 days. So over time, his calendar got off. The spring equinox got pushed later and later in the year, which affected the setting of the date of Easter. And in medieval Christianity, where there's a lot of superstition around getting things like these dates right, this produces a real crisis. So Gregory sets out to fix it, and he does in a pretty ingenious way. First of all, Gregory eliminates 10 days out of the calendar in October of 1582. He just wipes out 10 days to take into account the time that Julius Caesar's calendar did not account for. And then Gregory adjusted the leap year thing. And this is still how it's calculated, and it's crazy. Every 4 years, there's a leap year, except for years that are multiples of 100, unless those years are divisible by 400. Okay? Every 4 years there's a leap year, except in years that are multiples of 100, unless those years are divisible by 400. So if I have this correct, 2000 was a leap year, 2100 will not be a leap year. All to set the day of Easter. Now, this Gregorian calendar is the calendar that is used throughout the Western world presently. And it's a calendar based on 12 months, roughly 30 days in a month, days of 24 hours, and a year of 365 days. And this Gregorian calendar keeps the names of the months that the Julian calendar gave us: January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. Interesting thing, all 12 months named after either Roman gods, Roman festivals, or Roman numerals or numbers. So October, November, December, Roman numbers, 8, 9, 10. July, named after Julius Caesar. January, named after the Roman god Janus. You get the idea. And still to this present day, every year, every month, we're acknowledging Roman gods, Roman festivals, Roman numbers. Be that as it may, just interesting. And our calendar has come to mirror or track what we might think of as progress, hasn't it? Especially in this part of the world, in this climate in which we live. The calendar came somewhat to track agricultural progress, didn't it? We start here in January, about April, May, we're thinking about planting crops. We get to August, September, we're harvesting. Takes us to the end of the year in December. There's a progression agriculturally. That progression transferred into an educational process, didn't it? Where in our culture at least, we've got this idea of September, or rather September through May being the school year, and then we've got this interim of June through August where we take a break. And the idea that is communicated through this model is that there's a progression to the year. We start out September in day one of first grade, and by the end of May, we're ready to go to second grade. So we take a break, and then in September, it begins all again. Now, progress, linear development. These things are byproducts of our present observance of the calendar. So, do you make more money this year than you did last year? Are you in a different grade this year than you were last year? Next year, will you be in a different position at work than you are now? It's all about tracking development. Early in the church's life, based largely or to a degree on the experience early Christians had had with the Jewish calendar, Christians began to overlay on top of the Julian calendar and eventually the Gregorian calendar another calendar that was not developed around the cycle of the sun or the rhythm of the moon, a calendar that was developed around the life of Jesus Christ, a calendar that was developed around celebrating and proclaiming the good news, the good reality that Jesus brought into our world. And this calendar, it functions somewhat differently than the Julian calendar or the present day Gregorian calendar. And it definitely communicated a very different emphasis. This Christian calendar, which again doesn't develop in one particular point of time, we can't point to a particular date or council where we say, hey, that is when they created the Christian calendar. It was a gradual process of development in the early centuries of the church. We start to get some formalized versions of it as early as the Council of Nicaea in the early part of the 4th century, continues to develop over the church's life. But as it presently exists, the church year does not begin in January like our year does. The church year begins in December with a season called Advent. Advent is the season of the 4 Sundays before Christmas Day, which is always on December 25th. I'll take another sermon to explain why we set Christmas Day on December 25th. This is the start of the church year. And Advent is all about anticipation. Anticipation of what will be, anticipation of what will come. What an interesting way to start the year, right? With a positive expectation of all God will do and has done through the person of Christ. Advent begins the church's year. And Advent takes us to Christmas, which interestingly in the church calendar, Christmas is the 12 days after December 25th. So think about that. In our culture, all the attention, all the excitement, all the focus is in the build-up, isn't it? That's when the celebration happens, and then Christmas hits, and well, you know how you feel the day after Christmas. it's all over. No, no, no. Not in the Christian tradition. The celebration begins on Christmas Day. Christ is here. Jesus has come. The reality is among us. The kingdom of God is upon you. The celebration is not in the build-up. The celebration is in the reality of what has happened and taken place on Christmas morning. The Christian calendar celebrates Christmas for the 12 days after Christmas morning, which takes us to the next season of the church year, which is Epiphany. And Epiphany runs from the 12 days after Christmas, so January 6th, through Ash Wednesday. So we're in Epiphany presently if you're listening to this prior to Ash Wednesday. And Epiphany is all about what takes its name from the wise men in Matthew's birth narrative who come and recognize Jesus as King. Epiphany is all about making Jesus known. Jesus has come. Now Jesus is made known in his reality to the world, who he is and what he's doing. This season of Epiphany is about proclaiming the reality of Christ, who he is, who is this Jesus who has come in the flesh. Epiphany takes us to Ash Wednesday, and so now if you're tracking this by the Julian calendar, Epiphany is in January, Ash Wednesday now in February. Ash Wednesday, you ready for this, is the Wednesday 46 days before Easter. Why 46 days? Well, Ash Wednesday begins the season of Lent. Lent is a 40-day period of fasting prior to the celebration of Easter. But you don't fast on Sunday, because Sunday is a day of celebration of resurrection even during Lent. So 40 fast days, 6 weeks, includes 6 Sundays, which are not fast days. And so Ash Wednesday, to account for those 6 Sundays, is 46 days before Easter, allowing for 40 days, Monday through Saturday, of fasting. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Lent, this season of fasting, runs roughly 6 weeks through March, usually into April. And now we come to Easter. Easter, the celebration of the resurrection, preceded by a Holy Week in which we observe the events in the final week of Jesus' earthly life. Easter celebrates the resurrection, and you ready for this? Easter is a 50-day celebration in the church's life. As resurrection, you can't celebrate it, you can't embody it, you can't proclaim it adequately in a 24-hour period. Resurrection becomes a way of life for the people of Christ, and so the church calendar, it gives it 50 whole days. And remember, Easter is always set as the first Sunday following the first full moon following the spring equinox. This Easter celebration, it takes us through April into May, and then we come to Pentecost, which is the celebration or the acknowledgement of the Spirit's movement among us. And just as Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of Lent, Pentecost marks the beginning of what we call ordinary time. And ordinary time runs from May all the way through June, July, August, September, October, and November. And the church year ends the last Sunday of November. So you ready for this? Christ the King Sunday, or the Feast of Christ the King. Church calendar has 6 distinct seasons, not 4. We think summer, fall, winter, spring. The church has Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, or ordinary time. It's interesting that in the Christian, and then ending ordinary time with Christ the King Sunday, and then we go back and we do it all again. We come back to Advent. Couple quick thoughts about this calendar that really runs November through October in the church year. We begin in Advent. Right in the middle, we have Easter, and then we have ordinary time. Think about how fascinating this is. And I'm indebted to the scholar Diana Butler Bass for her observations about this. Easter, the central event of the church's life, comes right in the middle, not at the end. The Christian calendar is not this linear progression where we end at the final definitive moment. The definitive moment is right in the middle. The Christian year helps us prepare for this moment, and then it challenges us to live from that moment. That's really important because that's going to come into play in our Easter talk this year. So remember, the Christian calendar helps us prepare for Easter, and then we live from Easter. Easter is not the end in the Christian calendar. It's right in the middle. And the Christian calendar is not so much about this linear progression where we have the year of first grade and we get through and now we're in second grade. The Christian calendar is a little more cyclical as we keep living in and through these themes year after year. We keep cycling through these themes, anticipating what God will do, celebrating the presence of Jesus among us, making Jesus known, preparing ourselves to celebrate the resurrection, then living from the resurrection. And so this week, with Ash Wednesday, we move into Lent, this 46th day period of fasting. Lent helps us or invites us to consider, I think, at least two big things. The first is our own mortality. If you come from a tradition that imposes ashes on Ash Wednesday, often the tradition includes the words, from dust you are, and to dust you will return. In a culture that is obsessed with longevity of life, Lent and Ash Wednesday in particular reminds us that life is finite. Life comes to an end. We're not here forever. The amount of time and what we do in that time is necessarily limited. And there's a healthy perspective bringing that realization brings to life. It's like when you go to a funeral, especially a funeral of someone who was well regarded, and people talk about the difference that person made in their lives and in the world, and you find yourself saying, oh my, I want people saying that about me at my funeral. It kind of jars you awake to realize your days are counting down. Ash Wednesday is this helpful reminder that we're not here forever. So let's make the most of what we have now. Let's make the most of our life while we're here. And to that end, and again, Diana Butler Bass was helpful in pointing this out. Lent becomes a season to practice our faith in a way of developing it and maturing it, which is why historically the church has developed disciplines or practices that people engage in, not just in Lent, but throughout the year, to do what? To strengthen our faith, to build our faith muscles so that we can live more fully the life Jesus has called us to. And this is what our courses practicing the way are all about. And if you're in one of those courses right now, whether on the Sabbath or scripture practices, you know that's what these things are about. They're opportunities for us to practice our faith muscles, to build them, to strengthen them. And Lent gives us a really focused 40-day period to do that in. So, to take advantage of that opportunity, let me challenge you to consider two possibilities for Lent as we approach it this year. Think of something that perhaps you want to stop. This again would be the idea of fasting. Something I want to give up, not because I have to, not because God requires this of me, not because God will like me anymore if I do this, but because in giving something up, I build my own spiritual muscles, my own resolve, my own character. When I say, for instance, you know what, I don't need this particular activity or this particular thing to be fulfilled or happy in life, because I realize my contentment ultimately comes from God. Think about something you might want to stop for that 6-week period. Or think of something you need to start. Maybe you say, hey, for the 6-week period of Lent, I'm going to come to church every single week. I'm going to engage in the online service every single week for 6 weeks, because starting this discipline of regular worship and engagement with the people of God, that would be a good thing. They say, I'm going to start giving, maybe to the church, maybe to another cause. For 6 weeks, I'm going to consistently practice generosity, because that will help build my spiritual muscles, my muscles of faith. Lent gives us an opportunity for a very defined and really quite short 6 weeks period to think about doing one of these things intentionally. And let me encourage you to start it all off by taking advantage of the opportunities for prayer and reflection that we're providing across our sites on Ash Wednesday. Think about starting this 40-day journey with that intentional engagement. The church calendar is a helpful tool for us to think about life a little bit differently than our Gregorian calendar challenges us to do. Rather than see time simply as a linear progression, all interestingly around Roman gods, Roman festivals, and Roman numbers, the church calendar challenges us to think about life as a movement around the reality of Christ. We anticipate him, we celebrate him, we proclaim him, we prepare ourselves with him as he did for 40 days in the wilderness before he began his public ministry. We suffer with him through Good Friday. We rise with him on Easter Sunday, and then we live life in light of that resurrection. I hope the church calendar is a helpful tool for you as you develop your own relationship with God and walk with Jesus Christ. And again, hope this talk is at least informative in helping you understand why we have these seasons that we do. And I hope this is an invitation to you to take seriously the opportunity afforded to us by Ash Wednesday and the 40-day season of Lent.